Hello and welcome back. This is Isaac and you're watching ACT Reading Prep. We're going to continue with the humanities passage and see if we can deal with it a little bit in a better sense. Continuing from the last lesson, what we want to do is we want to continue to connect the dots in between the paragraphs of the passage, and that you can clearly, well, at least generally understand what the passage is about, and quite possibly, clearly understand what the passage is about, so that it can help you in solving some of those questions. All right. So that's what I'm hopefully that you can get this process of connecting the dots or the procedures, and that you can use this in the real test so that it can save you time and it can give you a better quality or better grade or better scores in the future. All right, so let's continue with today's lesson. Real ACT, 324 pages, 325. So take a look at them if you have the book, and let's get started with the passage itself. Now remember, I told you that the humanities passages, although they deal with the sort of a global issues, but they will all bring it or boil it down down to the U.S. cultures, or at least something that is related with U.S. It's inevitable in a sense that it's a U.S. Test, right? It's a U.S. based test, and therefore they will all deal with these U.S. issues. At least the social and humanity issues will be dealt with in a sense that it will talk about U.S. related issues. And of course, natural sciences will also do the same. They'll talk about the global issues at hand, but they will bring it down to the U.S. levels. All right, so remember that. Always keep that in mind. All right, moving on to the passage itself. Humanities, this passage is adapted from the essay Spaced Out, the Star Trek literary phenomenon where no TV series has gone before. So we're talking about Star Trek. Now, I have to admit that I'm not a big fan of Star Trek. I wasn't one of those people who religiously holds Star Trek or any other science fiction TV series or science fiction movies. I'm not one of those people. I like them. I watched all the Star Trek motion pictures. I've seen many of its TV programs, the primetime TV series. I did watch all of that, as well as anything that has to do with science fiction, space exploration, things like Star Wars, or things like the V, if you remember the V, the program, the TV series. I've watched a lot of stuff, but I can't really say I'm a big fan of Star Trek. But at least I know what Star Trek is about. At least I know what its themes are. At least I know what it involves. All right, so it would be easy for you to answer these questions if you knew what Star Trek was all about, and if you knew, if you were a great, a Star Trek buff, then you can probably answer this question with no problem at all. All right. So anyways, it's written by Michael M. Epstein, which appeared in Television Quarterly. So it's a magazine, right? So it's been written in a magazine, the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, 1996. And so you know that it's going to talk about Star Trek, and you know that it's going to talk about a literary phenomenon where no TV series has gone, meaning that there's something extraordinary about the TV series Star Trek. Okay? All right. So same thing. We're going to do the same thing. The first paragraph is, we always consider this as an introductory. We'll read the first and the last sentence of the paragraph. It says, on September the 8th in 1966, when NBC, National Broadcasting Company, premiered its new futuristic series Star Trek, few were watching, because contrary to what we all see, it was a failure. It was a show. At its opening, at its beginning, the show was unpopular, or it was not so popular at all. People would not watch it. All right, and then the last sentence says, we'll read it from. Well, we'll have to read the entire thing, because either way, this is the entire passage. So we'll read that. Conceived by television writer Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry wrote a lot of screenplays, which are not, in which sense the Star Trek is the most popular work, or work of art that he's done, or work of writing that he's done. Everything else is not so popular, right? But anyways, Gene Roddenberry, as part of American Western, Part science fiction and past contemporary morality play, Star Trek languished for 2.5 years before being canceled as a ratings flop in January 1969. So meaning until 1969, so beginning 1966 to January 1969, it was a total failure. The show was total failure, right? And you can see the important parts here, the American Western, right? It's a part American Western. Although it's a science fiction movie, Star Trek, it's a part American Western. Remember, what's an American Western? American Western is the exploration, the age, not the age of exploration, but it's the exploration. It's finding new places and quite possibly making a habitat into that parts of unknown Western United States, right? That's first idea. And then of course it's an SF, science fiction. Of course it deals with not the Western part of the United States, but it deals with the space and the different or other universe. And it says part contemporary morality play. If you've closely watched Star Trek, it deals with a lot of morality, right? If you've seen the most recent film, Star Trek Into Darkness, stars Benedict Cumberbatch and some other person, I forget his name, something of Chris Pines, I think, right? Chris Pines. If you've seen that movie is about morality, right? Isn't it? So see, I'm not a big fan of Star Trek, so I can't remember their names, but Captain Kirk is this person who was immature. He was very much of a maverick in his own sense. He comes into terms with, accepting responsibility as the captain of the Enterprise, NSS Enterprise, I think. Maybe I'm a fan of Star Trek, but he learns the moral values, going to different universes, going to the different habitations, and he helps these people out, help these different species out, and in turn he learns these morality or moral values. And Into Darkness was the same thing. If you remember that character played by Benedict Cumberbatch was what was it? A person it was a character or a captain who was disgruntled by the fact that his men died in some sort of an accident or some kind of a incident, right? And he believes that what do you call it? The Federation or whatever, the national space, whatever, right? I mean, the coalition, or at least the association that they've formed, are responsible for it, and he's trying to get back at them, right? But he realizes that that's not the right way to do it because it's morally wrong. So, I mean, Star Trek most likely will deal with morality issues, especially like justice, right? What is justice and how justice could be served. And so that's the idea here. So you need to keep that in mind. And then the second paragraph says 2 years later, so after 2 years of 1969 to 2 years, Star Trek somehow had captured the imagination and viewers' loyalty of the millions of Americans who discovered the show anew in syndicated reruns. When you say syndicated reruns, that's what we're talking. We're talking about the cable shows or cable TV or the local stations, TV stations, rerunning the Star Trek series, and so people started to love it. So it picked off, right? It's a late bloomer. People started to pick up this new futuristic, like TV series, and they started loving it, right? Captured the imaginations of these people. And then perhaps more than other television series, Star Trek benefited greatly from being the right show at the right time. So what do we mean by that? Being the right show at the right time. We will not read the details. We'll read that later on. But you just need to remind yourself that it was the right time, the right show. Okay? So remember all that idea about the American Western, the morality value or the moral values, and as well as the science fiction part of it. It all played in tune, right? So that people started loving it. Although television news programs helped focus the country on the rifts that had begun to percolate on campuses, in city streets, and around dining room tables, as a rule, entertainment programming avoided conflict and controversy. All right. So again, news, of course. News programs will talk about the problems and the issues that have been going on, that had been going on at the time. Vietnam War was one of it. Peace movement was one of it. Campuses, of course, if you remember back in LA, I don't know if it was Stanford or if it was some other campuses, started to hold a peaceful demonstration, and police came in and they started beating on the students and whatnot. I mean, that was the story here, right? And city streets, there were anti-war movements, there were anti-race movements, especially the blacks, the minority, were pretty much angry at the current government back then, and they started to protest against the government. And I mean, if you're probably familiar with the groups such as Black Panthers and whatnot, I mean, that's the 1960s, late 1960s and early 1970s, and so you get the picture, right? But it says that the entertainment, as a rule, the entertainment programming should not deal with the controversies and the conflict, right? That's the idea. And then Star Trek was different. So Star Trek was different, as in it played a different role than the other entertainment programs, because it clearly states that the entertainment programs were not able to deal with the conflicts and the controversy. But I guess what the next paragraph is talking about is that the Star Trek was able to do so, or that was different. It was able to convey these ideas, right? All right, next. Indeed, it was precisely because its futuristic storyline that Star Trek was able to address many of the contemporary social problems that other programs shunned. That other programs were not even able to do this, but Star Trek, because of its futuristic storyline, right? It's not current, it's futuristic. I mean, Star Trek, I'm pretty sure, was set at approximately 2200, I think it's somewhere there, right? It's very into the future, where hyperdrives are possible. That you can travel you can travel faster than the light from one place to the other, and you can also energize, meaning you can transport a human being from you can beam up, right? And you can beam some humans into a different area. I mean, that's something that's quite not possible. Maybe in the future as well, but that's what we call a very futuristic idea, right? So because the storyline was very futuristic in a sense, if you remember the story, there are no countries, there are only planets, and there are only the organization which will sort of like unite the entire universe, right? Into the good ones and the bad ones. And so you can't really say that the story is focused on current America, but because of it's a storyline that was set very into the future, it was able to address these issues, right, in a little bit more of a vague way, not too obscure, but not too ambiguous, but kind of an obscure way, right? Okay, so that's the idea there. The other programs shunned. All right, the next paragraph. In nearly 30 years, Gene Roddenberry's fantasy space concept has spawned 4-time Prime series. That's 4-time Prime TV series, right, which runs like yearly or more than a year. Continued syndications, meaning cable TVs and local TV stations have bought this and rerun every primetime series that they've come up with. A cartoon, 8 major motion pictures, 8 motion pictures of films, right? There had been 8 major motion pictures. And then it says countless toys, games, and computer software, right? So again, this part of the paragraph is kind of giving us the success that the Star Trek, how do we put it? A Star Trek empire has made, right? Okay, and then the next paragraph, of all the classic and the contemporary shows available to a critic, none illustrates the scope of America's cultural evolution as eloquently as the saga of Star Trek and its next generation spin-offs, right? So therefore, we're all saying that Star Trek has most eloquently put these ideas, right? So contemporary shows available to critic, none illustrates the scope of America's cultural evolution, right? So Star Trek is representation of the America's cultural evolution, right? That's what we're saying. Next paragraph, Star Trek offers viewers the paradox of a program that combines provocative insight into changing cultural values with the reassuring comfort that the known universe of Starfleet, Klingons, and phasers can nonetheless survive intact and even grow. Right? So again, that's what the Star Trek holds, right? What the Star Trek actually talks about. It's the paradox of a program that combines provocative insight into the changing cultural values, right? With the reassuring comfort that the known universe of Starfleet, Klingons, you know what Klingons are, right? Klingons are the people with the pointed ears, right? Okay, Klingons. And the phasers can nonetheless survive intact and even grow, right? Even with the cultural differences, they're able to grow, they're able to, survive each other. That's the idea. Next paragraph. Because of its active fandom is people who love it, right? Star Trek has become a television phenomenon like no other in American culture. I would say Star Trek is a very much of a cultural phenomenon in which there are tons of people who love the show. There still is a convention that's going on, right? Every year or two, people gather in their, like cosplay. They become their favorite character, and they meet and they, mingle and they share information and so on and on and on, just like Comic Cons, right? That's what the American culture is like, and that's sort of created the American culture, and that's what we're talking about here. Okay, all right. So you don't know the details, but you know it's about Star Trek, and you know what each and every paragraph at least tries to deal with, right? Okay, keep that in mind. Moving on to the first question. The main purpose of the passage can be best described as an effort to what? Effort to tell us something about Star Trek, but not just Star Trek, but what would be the topic. Explain how and why Star Trek has endured. That's a possibility. And illustrate what American society was like at the time the original Star Trek series was created. Well, it's about Star Trek, not American society, although it deals with American society, just to give the readers that Star Trek somehow played an important role in that society, right? Discuss how Star Trek's storyline has changed over its 30-year history. Not really, it doesn't really tell you so, or at least it's not about that. Describe the different forms Star Trek has taken, such as television series, films, and novels. It's also true, but we're not really talking about the different forms yet, but rather we're talking about how Star Trek has what? Has endured, right? We're talking about how Star Trek has continued its legacy until today. That's what we're talking about. I hear there's a new Star Trek movie coming out, right? I mean, that's how popular it is. People would go watch it, right? So explain how and why Star Trek has endured. Now, although it seems like the Star Trek somehow has, the main point of it seems like that, the Star Trek somehow was able to confront the issues, the social issues at the time, because it was in a special settings, or the storyline was in a special settings, and they were able to do this where no other shows were able to do this. And we're not really talking about that topic, but we're talking about how it became successful, right? Until now. Because if you remember what the passage was about, or at least what the passage came from, where the passage came from was spaced out, these Star Trek literary phenomena, where no TV series has gone before, by Michael N. Epstein, which appeared in television quarterly. Remember, it's a television magazine, and we'll talk about how that program survived this long and how the program was so successful, right? Rather than that program was very socially, active and whatnot. I mean, that's not what we're really talking about. So the story is that explain how and why Star Trek has endured so long, right? That's the idea. Good. Moving on to next. The author's attitude toward the subject of the passage can best be characterized as. Now remember, the author, I don't know if he is a Star Trek fan or not, he talks very positively about Star Trek, right? He says how no shows were able to do so, but Star Trek was able to do so, right? And he says that Star Trek was somehow addressing the issues, right? Addressing the issues at the time. And it bore 4 primetime TV series, and it had 8 different motion pictures, games and whatnot, right? So on and on and on. So if you read all these, if you kind of connect the ideas, the author doesn't seem to be amused. Tolerance, no, he doesn't tolerate it. When you say tolerate it, it means you're sick of it, but he's trying to tolerate it. That's not true. Detached interest, I don't think so, because he's talking about all things, right? 4 primetime shows. I mean, after 2 years, it started to pick off, right? A warm appreciation would quite possibly be the answer. Mild skepticism, I don't think he's a skeptic because he doesn't really say, you know, by the way, Star Trek is sort of corny, right? He doesn't say that. So anyways, the answer has to be warm appreciation, and of course turns out to be warm appreciation, because what he says about Star Trek is most likely like, you know, it's an amazing show. Well, he doesn't say amazing, but it's a show nonetheless that was very different from others, and the show was able to deal with different issues, and that's why it was able to continue on with with a lot of branches, right? I mean, into TVs, series, movies, into games, and into you know, like toys and so on and on and on. So the answer has to be warm appreciation, right? Simple as that. Moving on to the next. 23. It can be reasonably inferred that the author believes Star Trek first became a success in what year? Now, if you remember, it started September 1966, and after 2 years' time into 1969, January, of course, September, you should know this from your memory. After 2 years from here, right? After 2 years, that's 1971. After 2 years from here, it started to pick off, right? That's the idea. So when did it first become successful? Or when did it first become successful? So this idea here is a failure, right? And after this, the syndicated cable channels and local TV stations have started to rerun this, and then people started to pick off on that, and so it's 1971. And let's see if the answer is correct. 1971, right? Easy as that. Simple questions, simple answers. I'm pretty sure you're able to deal with this, all right? Moving on, 24. According to the fourth paragraph, lines 25 to 33, compared to television news programs of the time period, entertainment programming is described as. We read this part already. For some reason, we've read that part because it was the part where we had to read right here. Now, do you see a pattern now? Do you kind of see the pattern now? The pattern is the important parts of the passages that we read, namely the first and the last sentence of the first paragraph, and then the first sentences of each of the rest of the paragraph. You realize that the questions, right? Questions will deal with those parts. Most likely, like 80% of the time, they will deal with the parts that we've already read, right? That we've already read. And so that kind of gives us this idea, the pattern, that if you read on to the first paragraph, first sentences of the paragraph, you are sure to get an answer. You're sure to be, you know, referred to an answer. And that's what we want to do, and that's what we really like to do. All right, so remember that. That's why we read the first parts of the sentences, right? So it says, although television news program helped focus the country on the rifts that had begun to percolate on the campuses and the city streets and around dining room tables, as a rule, entertainment programming avoided conflict and controversy, right? We read that part. If we want to further our reading, it says escapist comedy about suburban witches, genies, and rural townspeople was standard fare. If you remember Sabrina, do you remember the show Sabrina? Maybe not, because this was back in the time, right? I mean, I didn't used to watch it, but I was watching. I mean, you know, I came across Sabrina, which was about the suburban witch, right, who lived in a suburban town where she does her nose or something, and she can do her tricks, right, and she fixes, you know, people's problems and whatnot, family problems, whatnot, right? That's the idea, right? Genies and the rural townspeople, right? And then network drama emphasized law and order and conformity, whether on the police beating, in a courtroom, or out of the great western frontier, right? So the entertainment programming tend to avoid, or tend to sort of like detach itself from the current issue that was going on, right? I mean, that's true because, I mean, it's not just because they wanted to do this or those who are in control wanted to do this, but that's what drama and that's what entertainment is about, right? I mean, you don't just watch, say, a funny comedy show. Well, American comedy is a little different, but let's say you don't just watch drama or TV series and say, okay, I mean, that's what's going on right now. It's the current issue. I mean, for example, if you watch CSI, right? I mean, it's not likely that, you know, killings like those, like serial killers and psychopathic killers, often, you know, happen. I mean, it doesn't really happen that often. I mean, to your surprise or to your amazement, homicide cases do not like happen that often, like every day. That's not true, and like things that are difficult to solve never really happens, right? Unless things like psychopathic killers exist out there, but it doesn't mean that psychopathic killers are on the loose everywhere, killing everybody, right? That's not true. Like, for example, the murder scenes are not that complicated, right? I mean, you are able to find who actually did kill people, right? I mean, right there and then. And so, again, the idea of drama or idea of the TV series is to entertain you, right? To keep you off the things that are happening outside, out there, right? I mean, things that are happening in reality. They want you to forget about reality and for the moment focus on the drama, right? For example, if you've seen Gossip Girl or that gossip series, I mean, it's the stories of the affluent rich kids on the upper west side of the was it Upper West Side or upper side of the New York or Manhattan, and it doesn't really give you you can't really connect to that life because that life is so much different from your life, and you're just try to live that life through that drama, and that's it, right? So here when they say that the entertainment program was not able to deal with the conflict and controversy, and that's what they mean, right? That's what they mean. So the answer here is then, of course, what would it be? Or described as what? More willing to examine the rifts developing in American society? No, the entertainment program would not do so. More willing to portray violent conflict and controversy? No, they are not willing to do so. They're less willing to do so. So less willing to promote the principles of conformity and order? No, they actually did promote the principles of conformity and order by giving it a American, by slapping on American value on it. Is it then less willing to present a realistic picture of the contemporary issues? Yes, true. That's the idea. Less willing to, or at least not less willing to present a realistic picture of a contemporary is what the entertainment program was trying to do, because it wanted to make people, keep people's consciousness off the reality so that they would focus on the, entertainment part of it rather than the reality part of it. The reality back in 1960s or late 1960s and early 1970s was not so good for America, right? Okay. 25. As described in the passage, the effect Star Trek has had on the publishing industry can best be summarized by which of the following statement. Now, unfortunately, we haven't read anything that relates to the publishing issue, right? So one thing that you'll have to do is find publishing, that idea in the passage. Now, what we can do is we can refer back to the passages now. So we'll start from the very beginning just to try to find that, sense, right? I mean, you should be able to do this, but we're trying to go through the procedures so that you know how to do this. First part, no, it will not definitely deal with the publishing part of it. This one, no, because it's still the history of Star Trek. This one, not really, because this will talk about perhaps more than other television series benefited greatly from the right time and right place, and so that's not it. This one, not really, because it's just something that we read, right? It talks about how entertainment programming was not able to deal with the conflict or controversial issues. Star Trek was different. It will also deal with how Star Trek was able to do so, right? Other than the other entertainment programs. And then here it says, it was precisely because of its futuristic storyline that was able to do so, right? It's not really dealing with the publication as well, right? In the nearly 30 years primetime series and blah, blah, blah. Now here, starting here, would be the best place to put that idea, because if you remember this part, it says 4 primetime series, continued syndications of the cartoon and 8 major motion pictures and countless toys, games and computer software. That's the idea, right? That's where the publication or publishing should come in. And what do you know? Nearly overlooked, however, is the unparalleled impact Star Trek had on the industry that has only recently became television friendly: publishing. It's right there, right? So since the early 1970s, the first novels hit bookshelves, the world of Star Trek has exploded in print like no other phenomenon in American popular culture. Star Trek fan volumes, cast memoirs, and novels continue to appear, and in record numbers, right? So not just the Star Trek novel, right, but the fan volumes, which is the actual volumes, and then the cast memoirs. I mean, there are some famous people, those people who made career out of Star Trek, people like, was it Jon Stewart? People like William Shatner, right? I mean, these people have made like career off of Star Trek. I mean, otherwise they probably would have been great actors, but otherwise, I think they wouldn't have been that popular. I mean, for example, William Shatner became so popular off of this. He's still being discussed today. I mean, his image of him as an actor is always like Captain, was it Kirk? Or Captain Williams? I'm not so sure what captain he was. I think it was Captain Kirk. William Shatner is just that person, that character, right? I mean, that's what we were talking about. So here, when we say publishing, right? What would be our answer then? So industry can be best summarized which of the following. Star Trek's impact can be safely overlooked because the publishing industry remains unfriendly to television. That's not what we're talking about. Star Trek made an impact with its first novel, but that impact has lessened over time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about in record numbers. Star Trek's tremendous impact has been primarily limited to novels. No, it was not just novels. It made motion pictures and so on. Star Trek has had a deep impact with its extensive and popular range of books. That's what we're talking about, right? I mean, seriously, right? It's easy, right? Again, that's the idea. Next number, 26. When the author states that Star Trek was the right show at the right time, I mean, that's what we read, right? He most likely means that the series benefited from what, though, right? Right time at the right time and right show. So is it the unsettled social and political conditions, or is it the general popularity of syndicated reruns, or is it an increased appetite for escapist entertainment, or is it the increasingly empowered middle classes? This is something that you need to read back, right? So let's go back and try to read that part. And we know where it appears, right? We all know that it appears right here, right? Okay. So it was precisely because of its futuristic storyline that Star Trek was able to address many of the contemporary social problems that other programs were not able to do so. Star Trek's visionary episodes on race relations, nuclear deterrence, multiculturalism, and ecology, among others, were not threatening to those who saw it as a fantastic science fiction. For those who saw the program as a window into current controversy, Star Trek offered insight and added perspective to continued American cultural and political change in the 1970s. Either way, the show's wide appeal in syndication was such that by 1977, Star Trek had become the most watched off-network series drama of all time, right? So that's how Star Trek was viewed as in people's eyes. And if you read a little bit further, where is it? Probably somewhere here, right? Somewhere here, benefited greatly from. So that's the idea now. We're going back to this. Perhaps more than other television series, Star Trek benefited greatly from being the right show at the right time. The right show at the right time. In middle-class America, social and political change in the late 1960s made it increasingly difficult for people to unite in common purpose. Civil rights struggles, the Vietnam War, and the rise of a culturally empowered youth movement, among other things, divided many Americans by race, gender, and age in politics, right? It divided the Americans, it segregated the Americans, and indeed it was precisely because of its futuristic storyline that it was able to do so, right? It was a successful show. So, then the idea here is, of course, is it unsettled social and political conditions? Or is it the general popularity of syndicated reruns? Or is it increasing appetite for an escapist entertainment? Or is it increasing empowered middle classes? It seems like, it's increasingly empowered middle classes that he's talking about. Not really, right? We're talking about the social and political conditions, right? Unsettled, unrest in social and political conditions where people were segregated between or among themselves, people who are very much interested in the racial issues, those people who are very much interested in the anti-war movement, and those people, the youth who are empowered by or having different values that were trying to fight the conservative ways and so on and on. So that's what we're talking about, right? Okay, good. 27. The passage indicates that Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry's primary purpose in creating the series was to what? Show how different life would be in the future, promote the space program and the exploration of the space, offer a light-hearted alternative to serious entertainment, or is it comment on problems facing people in the present, right? So which one is it? Now you can prominently see this as one of our answers, right? Why is that? Because so far we've been talking about how Star Trek was able to do so, right? So Star Trek was able to deal with current social issues. And what we want to do is see if that's true, if that idea is actually what Gene Roddenberry had when he wrote this story. So we'll go back and we'll find Gene Roddenberry and how he was trying to come up with this, right? In nearly 30 years, Gene Roddenberry's fantasy space concept has spawned 4-time series and so on and on and on, right? And on and on and on and on. Now, no, not in here. Excuse me. I will try to find Gene Roddenberry somewhere along the way. Here you go. Created in the optimistic afterglow of John F. Kennedy's inauguration of the space race, Star Trek's exploration of the final frontier was a theme that resonated with millions of idealistic and awestruck Americans who looked at the Apollo moon landing as a crowning positive achievement for the humankind. Still, as Gene Roddenberry often claims, Star Trek was less about the future than the present, right? So he says it was about the present, not about the future. So therefore, you can definitely say that Gene Roddenberry was very much on the money with the comment on the problems that facing people in the present, right? Not that in the future, but in the present. He wanted to sort of like avoid the current issues by going into the future and then talk about the current issues in the future, right? Okay, so the answer is D. Next, 28. According to the author, the primary benefit of the original Star Trek's futuristic storyline was that it allowed the series writers to do what? Right? So remember, futuristic storyline, we read this like a couple times already. The futuristic storylines were able to, enable the writers to do what? Offer perspectives and insights that were unthreatening, invent fantastic and entertaining science fiction worlds, easily develop related spin-offs such as films and new series, avoid controversial topics such as nuclear deterrence and multiculturalism. So what do you think the answer is? The answer, of course, is F, not J. If you thought J was the answer, then you've read it wrong. The authors of the Star Trek futuristic storyline, it did not help avoid controversial topics, but it helped convey the controversial topics, right, in a different timeline. So definitely not. Only thing that comes into perspective would be offer perspectives and insights that were unthreatening. Why unthreatening? Because if you think about 1960s and 70s, 1950s saw a Red Scare. You know what Red Scare is, right? Communism. 60s and 70s also saw that, as in, if you were against the government, then you probably were a communist, right? So, I mean, if let's say if the TV show somehow dealt with the idea of the current issue right now, right? Things like racial issues, like war times and all this. I mean, the television's TV series would have been, like bombarded with people saying that, that's not true, like they be bigoted so much, right? So that's the idea. So again, the only idea or the only reason why Star Trek was able to be successful was that it unthreateningly, right, dealt with all these issues. Unthreateningly, meaning there was no particular group of people who were, like pushing these agenda, or at least, they weren't able to connect the group of people to the group of people in reality. It vaguely dealt with that, right? So that's why it was positive, and that's why it was unthreatening, right? Okay. Next, 29. The author calls some of the original Star Trek's episodes visionary in line 46, most likely because I'm pretty sure we read that part, but we'll go back to it anyways and try to read that part, right? Why was it called visionary? Lines 46. Here we go. We'll read from above, right? Indeed, it was precisely because of its futuristic storyline that Star Trek was able to address many of the contemporary social problems that other programs shunned. Star Trek's visionary episodes on race relations, nuclear deterrence, multiculturalism, and ecology were not threatening to those who saw it as a fantastic science fiction. For those who saw the program as a window into current controversies, Star Trek offered insight and added perspective to continued American cultural and political changes or change in the 1970s. So you got that idea, right? Okay, so visionary episodes, race relations, nuclear deterrences, multiculturalism, and ecology, and so on and on and on. So, what would be the answer that we'd be looking for? So is it because they presented issues that weren't problems at the time but that now are? Or is it dealt with complex themes with imaginations and foresight? Or is it offered dreamy and unrealistic solutions to difficult problems? Or is it appealed to a wide audience through syndications? What would be the best answer? Of course, the best answer had to be B, right? Why is that? Now, if you look at A, presented issues that weren't problems at the time, but that now are. No, it was problems back then, and now so is now, right? So that's definitely out of the question. Offer dreamy and unrealistic solutions? I don't think so. It wouldn't offer an unrealistic or dreamy solutions about difficult problems. It was straightforward. Star Trek was very straightforward in solving the questions and solutions to the problems, right? Appealed to a wide audience through syndications? Not really. Syndication is not the reason why it appealed to the wide audience or wide range or broad range of audiences. It was because it resonated within the public, that it dealt with a lot of different materials or different issues at the time that each and every group of the society was interested in, and so therefore it became very much it appealed to the wide variety of audiences. So the only thing that it the answer is dealt with the complex themes, right? Complex themes like nuclear deterrence, multiculturalism, racial issues, with imagination, which is futuristic, right? Fantastic, SF, and foresight, right? They gave you this idea. Now, imagination and foresight was already seen in line 46. We'll look at that again, just to try to give you an idea. Right, it says visionary episodes on race and multiculturalism were not threatening to those who saw it as fantastic science fiction, right? Imagination, imaginary. And for those who saw the program as a window into current controversy, Star Trek offered insight, right? Added perspective to continued cultural and blah blah changes in the 1970s in America. And so therefore imagination and foresight kind of gives you that, satisfies the passage here, right? Okay, so the answer has to be, of course, has to be here. Complex themes with imagination and foresight. Okay? Right. So now let's go back to our question. 30 says the paradox we have already seen, right? The paradox that there is a very much of an imaginative world and that it deals with the current issues, right? That sort of a balance between, that's a paradox mentioned in line 77. Most directly refers to what the author sees as, we'll try to go back there. All right, so the paradox most directly refers to what the author sees as the conflicting ideas of what? What would be the conflicting ideas here, right? So remember, that's the conflicting idea. If I have to write it down here, the conflicting idea is that the current issues, right? That it deals with the current issues versus that it has this, science fiction, like almost unreal idea. Unreal, like, Klingons and whatnots, right? So that's the idea that we're looking for. So is it the paradox between the cultural values and the entertainment? Or is it the conflicting ideas of the familiarity and the changes? Or is it the comfort and the Star Trek universe? Or is it the survival and being provocative, right? So which is it? So the answer, of course, has to be the familiarity and change. Now, why is that? The familiarity and change is the answer. Now, we'll go back to it and try to read that again. It's not the cultural values and the entertainment per se, because we're not really talking about the entertainment issues or entertainment aspects or the entertainment component versus the cultural value. We're not really talking about that. We're not talking about the cultural value at all. We're talking about the current issues that's going on, right? Comfort in the Star Trek universe. Not what is comfort in the Star Trek universe? It doesn't really make sense there, right? Survival and being provocative. Yes, being provocative is okay, but survival of what, right? So it's familiarity and changes. Now let's see if that's true. So if we go back a little bit into that part, the passage, right? So you will see that the Star Trek offers the viewers the paradox of a program that combines the provocative insight into changing cultural values with the reassuring comfort that the known universe of Starfleet, the Klingons, and the Phasers can nonetheless survive intact and even grow. You see the idea, right? So the idea here is that the changing cultural values with the reassuring comfort that the known universe of a Starfleet. So you can say that this is changes and this is the, right, known. Which means the answer to that question again comes to, right, familiarity, the known, and the changes, right? So if you read that line 77, you're trying to come up with this conflicting idea. So this is like some like a comparison that the author makes within the passage itself, that he is saying that the paradox here is the familiarity of the current issues, that's, like changing things that are going on, or the changing current issue, or changing cultural values, and so on and on and on, as opposed to the known universe, right? Known universe, or the known Klingons and the characters within the program itself, or within the series itself, would not really change. The familiarity and the change, that's the paradox of it, right? Okay, you get the idea. All right, so that's it for today's passage. That's it for today's passage. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to really practice hard, especially in a timely manner. All right, most of the students have problem with time. If you have that book, if you have extra material you can work on, especially in reading and science as well, what I want you to do is I want you to make use of a technique which best suits you. Okay, for example, if you believe that prose fiction is the easiest, then start with that already, or maybe you can start with others and then come back to prose fiction because it's the easiest and you can solve this in a limited amount of time, right? All the other passages, if you think it's hard, you will have to spend more time, so you'll probably do that later on. Create a suitable pattern for you, so that you can use that pattern in solving questions in timely manner. All right. Again, time is the most important part in the ACT reading. Now, just to give you a little bit of heads up, from 2015 fall. This fall, that is, or maybe they will delay it, postpone it later on. But ACT plans to put in the multiple text passages. Meaning, right now you're given one big paragraph, right? One big paragraph in prose fiction, one big paragraph in social sciences and humanities and natural sciences. But most likely, what ACT will do is they will give you a short multiple passages, so that the multiple passages will deal with different viewpoints, I guess, and you will have to figure out the viewpoints, and you will try to find out the relationship between these text materials. Now, prose fiction, it's a possibility you will have that sort of a passage in prose fiction, as well as across all the platforms. You will have that multiple text variants. But most likely you will see these multiple text passages in natural sciences, because there are a lot to, there's a lot to compare and contrast in natural science. And also, I'd have to say, humanities and social sciences, you will see that most often than not. So from natural sciences, you'll see a lot of changes in multiple text passages, and then you will see a lot of changes in social sciences and humanities, and you will see probably the least changes in prose fiction, because it will be hard to find two different literary work that would in like opposition to each other, or maybe like complementing each other, and that's kind of hard to find. So they won't do that as much there, but they will do as much of it as possible in the natural sciences and humanities and social sciences sections of the reading. Now, of course, you don't have to worry about it right now. Those of you who are taking the test in April and probably in June would not have to worry about that. But if you're taking tests sometime later this year, maybe there's a chance that there might be a chance that it will change. The test format would change for reading, and if that's the case, I'll try to come up with the like a changed version, or at least like a similar version of that test, and so we'll talk about that and we'll get ready for that test. All right, so we will continue next lesson with the humanities passage, and we're going to move on to the natural sciences after, and we'll try to wrap up the entire lesson by giving you an extra test set, so that you can test your skills of what you learn throughout these lessons. All right, so thank you for watching again, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.